Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Doran Schrantz. I am a longtime organizer in Minnesota. I was formerly with Isaiah and Faith in Minnesota, and currently am the project director for the Organizing Lab, which works with state-based organizing organizations across the country, but have been a part of the whole mega team that has been responding to Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota. And the one piece of the strategy, which we're going to talk about today, which was leading towards January 23rd. So we're going to dive into that. What we're going to do today is we want to talk a little bit about sort of the broader context that this particular strategy and tactic of the Trump administration to advance their agenda, which played out in Minnesota through Operation Metro Surge. Sort of what was the context for that in the kind of national sense? What was the pro-democracy movement in Minnesota like writ large? We're specifically going to talk about a particular strategy that was led by the organizations on this call, but also was a broad coalition of 120 community, faith, and labor organizations to really build an offense to drive ICE out of Minnesota and change the conversation nationally about immigration and immigration enforcement and the Trump administration's strategy to use that as a way of consolidating their power nationally and share out strategic next steps. And then we're going to have a question and answer. So that's going to be the arc. I'm going to give it a little bit of a frame to open up, and then I'll be turning it over to the other leaders on this call. So to start with, I just want to contextualize what Operation Metro Surge was and its impact and implications of this particular endeavor on the part of the Trump administration. What was it, and what was its import and the implications for the rest of the country? And then give a little bit of context on January 23rd, which was the Day of Truth and Freedom, and then talk about what impact that has had. And then we'll talk about how we got there. So before that, I want to name that the pro-democracy movement in Minnesota, in the context of December, January, and February, was a broad, incredibly large and complex civil society mobilization. So I would estimate, and I can't fact check this, so this is based on observation, that at some points, probably 60 to 70% of the general population of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and to some extent extending out into the suburbs, of the whole population was involved in responding in some way. And there were three major pillars of that response. I'll get to that slide in a second. The three major pillars were a very robust, expansive mutual aid network that was decentralized, but had a lot of very significant leaders who were driving mutual aid to support people who had to shelter in place. It was the strategic foundation of the constitutional legal observing system, which Amelia is going to talk a little bit more in a minute, but there was also decentralized kind of neighborhood nodes in response. And then there was an offense. And the offense was really driven and led, or at least part of that offense was driven and led by faith, labor, and community, aligned faith, labor, and community organizations. And one particular strategy was something we call the Day of Truth and Freedom, which was a day of economic non-cooperation. And so the reason we chose to stage economic non-cooperation is that the foundation that was laid by mutual aid and the constitutional legal observing was, we couldn't have done anything without that foundation. But it was also true that we needed to escalate into an offensive posture with the Trump and DHS regime that was essentially acting in ways that suspended the constitutional, civil, and human rights of the entire population, with obviously particularly vulnerable targeting of immigrants, but really anyone who was Indigenous, Black, or Brown was unsafe, and anyone who decided to step in and resist or participate, that broad society mobilization, was also in danger of having their constitutional, human, and civil rights suspended during that operation. So that required a response that would be on offense, that would show a level of capacity to escalate, both around clarifying a set of really clear demands, investigating the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, no more funding for DHS, ICE out of Minnesota now. I can't believe I forgot that one. And so we believed that we both had to target ICE operations in terms of their supply lines, which were centered around the airport, and then also target potential defectors like major corporations in our state and make this also their problem. So they needed to defect from either overt or complicit silence which was tacit approval for this operation. And we needed to show the might and muscle of people who work, people who shop, like the power of our dollar, essentially. So we declared the Day of Truth and Freedom, which we said no work, no school, no shopping. Staged a set of escalating direct actions, including nonviolent strategic resistance and risking arrest in various places. We wanted to bring together the broad, for those of you who know these terms, like Popular Front, small businesses, faith communities, labor unions, just like very broad in who could have an on-ramp and participate. And launched this strategy about 2 weeks before the day. Where we ended up was having 1,000 small businesses agree to close in solidarity with the day. We had the day included nonviolent direct action at the Metropolitan Airport. It included sit-ins at Target and US Bank. It included a mass march. And then we use that to launch ongoing pressure on a set of corporate targets in Minnesota. So what was the outcome? Very like headlines, and then we'll get into how we got there. Mayday Strong helped us do a poll, like in the direct aftermath of the Day of Truth and Freedom. Blue Rose Research did that poll. You can put the next slide up. Blue Rose Research. There we go. So like, did the Day of Truth and Freedom work in terms of like, did people strike or did people withhold consent of spending or school? And what we know from the poll, and then I'll also share labor statistics, 80% of Minnesota voters across the state had heard about the Day of Truth and Freedom. 23% said that they had participated in some way in the Day of Truth and Freedom. And of that 23%, 38% said that they did not go to work. So it was a very significant action. It was a general strike. So the second piece of verification that we have that this really happened is this slide that you see next to the poll, which shows a giant dip. If you see workforce participation in Minnesota, they were kind of tracking it throughout the surge, and there's a giant dip there on 123, and the paper actually put a little arrow that says ICE out general strike. So we did do it. So question becomes like, what was the result? So this is not only due to the Day of Truth and Freedom, but we really put Minnesota on the map. It became a national conversation. They had to retreat. Kristi Noem lost her job. Donald Trump yesterday said that people are not, they are not allowed to talk. He told other Republicans they're not allowed to talk about mass deportations anymore. And all of the polls kind of across the country are showing that Trump is dramatically losing support on one of his quote unquote best issues, which was immigration. So and then we can, folks, Amelia and Alexa and Greg can talk a little more about some of the local wins that are coming out of this. But the reason we wanted to share this is we think it has enormous implications for both how we're going to fight to protect and defend the elections, May Day that's coming up, and like how we make sure that nationally, like across the country and states across the country, we are equipped to both defend ourselves, but also be on offense in relationship to this administration going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amelia Avalos, resident star. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doran Schranz. My name is Emilia Gonzalez Avalos. I'm Executive Director here at Unidos, Minnesota. And I want to share part of how Unidos, like in our experience, we help build a path for data and truth and freedom. And what you see here in the slides is the emerging of what we name as a constitutional project. So basically, we knew that MAGA will rely on mistrust of government, racial tension, and economic tension, economic instability to pit people against each other. We have seen that. That's the contextual reality of Minnesota. And in this particular place, it was like the bombarding of fraud, specifically Somali fraud, to continue to advance the scapegoating agenda, the mass deportations agenda, and pitting people against each other and mistrust of government. And so we made a choice to double down on constitutional resilience. And so we deploy what we now know as Monarca, which, yes, it is a rapid response strategy, but the foundational principles are the defense and embodiment of what it looks like defend your like First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, and perhaps 14th Amendment in public life, in the public arena, in the face of mass deportations. This project also embodied cross-racial solidarity and went from a defense strategy that helped on-ramp regular people from Minnesota to help us build what Doran called this popular front, that bigger we. And so in the First Amendment category, we helped train over 50,000 constitutional observers to date. We had around 30,000 by the time Operation Metro Surge was deployed to Minnesota. And we also deployed a Fourth Amendment strategy that we learned from our sisters and friends of Siembra in the Carolinas. And so with this First Amendment and Fourth Amendment, we were able to create, yes, resilience and emerging a strategy for worker and immigrant protection, but also we were able to create an on-ramp for regular people and also a redemption path for people that were not appalled by the immigration enforcement that was breaking our communities in Minnesota. So as you can see, there's the logo of Monarca. You can see in the photo that there's one of our mass trainings that happened in Minnesota. And so we, in the tradition of organizing in Minnesota, we were able to build a hybrid birthed from institutional-based organizing that adopted decentralized movement building strategies, but has embedded key interventions and elements of base building organizing that is able to turn a movement moment in attempting to build a majority. And so the majority means investing in people, doing leadership development, and setting to do things with higher risk, even though observation, as it happened in Metro Search, became a very high risk activity, but also there were other combinations of activities that were important for building into this moment, as you can see, is the targeted strategy over there in the photo. And so that's Unidos' experience, and I'll pass it to my sister in the struggle, Alexa from ICEA.
Thank you, Amelia. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Isaiah and our sister organization, Faith in Minnesota, got to the Day of Truth and Freedom. First, I just want to say Isaiah organizes across the state of Minnesota. We organize people of faith, including a Muslim coalition that is primarily East Africans and Somalis. We organize independent community-based childcare centers, folks who live in manufactured home parks, in teams, and parents who have children in public schools. So part of our story is the past year. You saw this in what Amelia talked about too. Organizations like ours, understanding that there will be a moment where more is demanded of us and our leaders, and preparing people for that. So over the past year and a half, Isaiah has been leading a path of political education, training, organizing, and team building, and base building expansion that led to a 5,000 person organizational convention in December. Those 5,000 folks spent 5 hours together in training, shared analysis about what is happening, learning from our own history and other countries that have experienced authoritarian slides, and beginning to ground in a compass of what might be required of regular people like us. We used the Montgomery bus boycott as an example, and we prepared. And it was very, very quickly after that that President Trump, that the Trump administration announced revoking temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota and across the country, that he called Somalis in Minnesota garbage, and a right-wing YouTuber over right around New Year's went to childcare centers, mostly Somali childcare centers, asking to see children and claiming that there was widespread fraud, which created an opening for Republicans in Minnesota to call for Operation Metro Surge, to call for an increase in ICE agents using the frame of Somalis participating in fraud. And as you heard, the fallout from that was significant. In our organization, we had childcare centers with babies and toddlers on an almost near constant lockdown, with ICE agents parked in parking lots, circling buildings, but also MAGA folks calling their phone lines all day with death threats. We saw across Minnesota, Somalis, but all people of color, anyone without white skin being racially profiled, asked to see their papers. And it escalated very quickly. So we were ready. We began to ask ourselves what might be required of us now. Yes, we are going to have people outside of our childcare centers with their whistles. Yes, we are going to do mutual aid. Yes, we are going to do our typical tactics like rallies and vigils and press events and lifting up stories. Absolutely. But we also collectively, our organizations, began to ask ourselves, how could we go on offense? What would it take to fight back and win a fracture in the feeling of inevitability of this regime? And we asked our members, is it time? And they answered yes. So hundreds and hundreds of people in churches, in mosques, in childcare centers, and in schools got trained in nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience. You can see the upper photo here is 100 clergy and faith leaders being arrested at the Minneapolis airport on the day of Truth and Freedom. This happened at the airport. It happened at corporate headquarters. It happened at the federal building where people were being detained. People decided to do economic non-cooperation at great risk. And it was possible because our organizations had been engaging people very seriously about their leadership for years, certainly, but especially the past year. And I have been thinking about what organizations like ours make possible in a moment like this. And this is not exhaustive, but in my experience, we can create containers like a day of truth and freedom and economic non-cooperation that are on-ramps. We can engage people in mass training. And perhaps most importantly, we can create spaces where people wrestle with their leadership and the level of risk that they are willing to take, and create opportunities for more and more leadership and risk that is scaffolded, that is strategic. And I want, before I pass to Greg from SEIU, I just want to share in a recent meeting with a couple hundred ICEA member leaders, the folks who are really at the center of this work. We asked them what they have learned about themselves through their leadership in Operation Metro Surge. And the most common response was, I learned I was braver than I thought I was. Across race, across class, we heard it again and again. I learned I was braver than I thought I was. And I think a lot about the kind of trauma people have been through in Minnesota and what it means to learn that about yourself in that moment, and to have agency and to have organizations that can invite you into strategic and risky and important action. And I will pass to Greg from SEIU.
Thanks, Alexa. So my name is Greg Namaker. I'm president of SEIU Local 26, which is a union of 8,000 property service workers, vast majority immigrant, majority women in the Twin Cities. And that's jobs such as janitors, airport workers, security officers. So for us, with our primarily immigrant membership, we just knew that the new Trump administration was going to be an attack on us from the beginning. And so we started a intensive process of internal education, starting with Know Your Rights, but also a political analysis about how we can confront these kind of authoritarian regimes. And many of our members comes from places where they have direct experience with this. So together we had these discussions at the steward level. We did, we have extensive WhatsApp systems throughout our membership with using videos and discussions, really trying to think about what do we need to do to stand up in this moment. So coming out of that, we really developed an analysis, and our steward council voted on this, that we had to figure out how to get to maximum disruption in each of our sectors if we were going to have a chance to stop the direction that this administration was going. So this was 12 months ago, significantly before the ICE occupation hit the Twin Cities. And so then, we decided that we needed to set out a set of internal leadership tests, because we just knew that in addition to the union's power in politics, obviously we have lawyers, we have resources, but our strongest power is obviously our own membership and its ability to resist. And so the tests of different rank and file leaders in their own work sites, their elected leaders are called stewards. What was the test for them? So actually for us, we found that we needed a different test in the different sectors. So the primarily Latino immigrant sector in janitorial decided that they would move a petition demanding that their employers pay into a legal defense fund to help families that are in the midst of legal cases around immigration. The security officers, primarily U.S. born, primarily white and African American, their test was to have the stewards move a petition to go to the state legislature, expanding security officers' rights and pay there, with the analysis that this administration is going after security officers and trying to take away their unions, such as has already happened in TSA. So each sector of the union had a different analysis, but the key question was, what are we doing to test the muscle of the leaders within those different work sites to be ready to fight? knowing that there was a bigger fight that was going to come at some point. So when ICE actually came in their largest in their surge, and starting in December and then even larger in January, we had pretty soon we had 30 members abducted by ICE. So this was not a distant intellectual question. This was our Uber, Lyft drivers being having their windows smashed and dragged out of their cars and their cars abandoned on the side of the road behind the airport. This was members hiding for hours inside of Target stores in the closet while ICE patrolled out around the store. So, this was just very visceral and raw. And after doing this preparation, we didn't know what was the level of fear within the membership. So we had a meeting of 150 of our top stewards. And when the call for a community day of no work, no shop, and no school was put forward by our coalition partners here on the call, 95% of those stewards that were in that meeting said that they would honor that day. So it really was a show that people were ready to take incredible risks. As immigrants, what that risk looked like might be different than some of the folks that were on the rapid response networks whose job was to go and be a legal observer when ICE came, right? The way that they were going to risk was different, but they were willing to walk off the job. And for us, again, in the union context, this is mid-contract. There are no legal protections really for most of those workers when they decided to walk off. By the end, we did an assessment. 1,100 of our members walked off the job on the 23rd of January. So it really was breathtaking. That was equal to or more than the number of workers who walked off the job during our last formal contract strikes over our own wages and benefits. So just really showed how much people were ready to fight and ready to risk if we could figure out the ways for them to step into that. Already my sisters here earlier have laid out some of the impacts. One other one I just wanted to name that was so huge was that up until that point, the major corporations in the Twin Cities had been completely silent before the 23rd of January. They had been completely silent about ICE's occupation of our community and all of both the murders and the abductions. And 3 days after the Day of Truth and Freedom, the largest corporations in the Fortune 500 in the Twin Cities all came out together with a letter calling for immediate de-escalation. And it was a few days after that Trump began his texts firing Greg Bovino and all the pieces that Doran laid out earlier. So, it just really showed that this kind of economic action had an impact on the corporations that were trying to stay out of this and trying to stay silent, and in truth, therefore, were complicit. And this forced them out of the bushes. Now, the actual wording of that letter was very weak from our perspective, but there is no question that it actually signaled a breaking point where some of these dynamics started to move. So within that, I think it also falls to me on our little panel here to just talk about some of the broader coalitional questions that we think were really important. So number one is, as we've talked about, in this kind of a moment, we don't want folks to get this unclear. The organizations on this call were a part of an alignment that really was able to play a very helpful role in calling for the day itself of no work, no school, and no shopping. But that was in the context of an incredibly sophisticated set of different community organizations, some in a C3 structure, some without a C3 structure, some unions, tons of folks taking risks that was not centralized. There was no central table that decided and controlled the direction of all of this. The Twin Cities is an ecosystem with many different centers of gravity. And what was so beautiful is they were all in motion at the same time. And I think it was just so clear, the No Kings formation was absolutely central in helping to bring the broad turnout to the day itself. We had 75 to 100,000 folks that were marching that day. That was far beyond the turnout capacity of the organizations itself that had called for that day initially. As multiple folks had talked about, the rapid response networks, both the ones that folks on this call together have helped organize, and then all of the ones that are unconnected to any formal organizational form that were taking risks every day. Renters organizations, soon after the day of no work and no shopping, ended up calling for a rent strike. So it was like each sector thought about what was its level of disruption that it could bring to this to this cocktail. Some of this we planned centrally. Much of it also then just started to happen. So I just really want to emphasize there was so many players in the Twin Cities that were in motion at the same time. That was part of what made it so powerful. Another example is some of the left-wing party, cadre groups were also active. Some of them were recruiting small businesses. It was just this beautiful moment where the community was clear that there had to be resistance because of our smaller alignment. The folks on this call that was able to call for the date. So many pieces started to swing into motion, even that we were not directly organizing, and that was part of what made it so massive. So the final thing I would say is, just while it is extremely true that all of these different parts of these different centers of gravity in the ecosystem were moving simultaneously, it is also true that there was a limit to how far the defensive fight could go within our community without a subgroup of organizations that had built trust, that had done planning to be able to call for the date itself. And that, for us, the language we use for that is the difference between coalition and alignment. And that ICEA, Unidos, Local 26, and a set of other organizations are in a deep long-term alignment where we really are under each other's hoods. We are pushing each other on how to be better. We share an analysis of what it means to build a base and be accountable to that base. And that has allowed us to push each other and to continue to try and be strong such that in moments like this, we have the ability to call for more offensive action. So I do think in every community that is thinking about these kind of moments, it is both important to understand that no one or two organizations are going to control the entirety of what's happening, nor should they try, but also the importance of having a subgroup of organizations that can build some trust and can lead across different sectors, can really try and name some more offensive tactics than would be normally possible. And so finally, I just would say this was a test. This was a test for the social movements in the Twin Cities, a test for our individual organizations, a test for Local 26 and our stewards, right? We measured each steward and how they were able to respond. So this was a test in January. Folks, and I know the people on this call are clear on this, we will have more important tests in the future. This is just a small taste of what is coming. And so would really encourage everyone to take that test-oriented approach. There is no one of these fights that is going to be decisive. We are strengthening our muscles. And so whether it's May Day as an opportunity coming up across the country, whether it is a specifically aggressive act of the Trump administration in your city, maybe it's ICE, maybe it's something different, but that we see these as the opportunities that they are, which is tests to build this muscle for the much bigger disruption that we must be prepared for in the near future. And Doran, help me. I think, is it, Wintana next? Awesome. Wintana.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Wintana Melakine. I am based in St. Paul, Minnesota. I lead an organization called Groundwork Institute and also a member of the team that did the ICEOutMN work, also the co-chair of the Democracy Defense Table. And so what Groundwork is that we're a movement hub, and our entire purpose is training the next generation of leaders. So we train folks to become community organizers, we train folks to become candidates, and then we also train elected officials once they get elected and figuring out how to govern. And I want to talk a little bit about our role in this moment and then the next steps that we're thinking about. So one of the things that I stepped into during this moment was really focused on organizing artists, elected officials, and influencers. So some of the things that we were able to get done as a coalition is have pins at the Grammys that said ICE Out. It was over 6,000 artists wore them, partnering with lots of national networks to do that. We had a letter signed by Minnesota artists and venues demanding Hollywood step up and support the work that we're doing. We had artists coming to town, a lot of podcasts, musicians working with us on messaging, donating a proceed of their concert and shows to Minnesota organizations. We had over 100 influencers join our call to figure out how to talk about this topic and how to get the message out. Many of them actually flew in for the rally, which kind of skyrocketed the viewership. And then we had over 30 members of Congress come to Minnesota, and we worked directly with them to figure out, messaging and all that kind of good stuff, and help them figure out where to go, where they weren't just being transactional and taking up limelight and just doing pressers on the street. The reason why we did all that work is because we knew we had to build those relationships with them and needed to be able to talk to them about their message directly. Because if we didn't keep the message focused on the local folks, particularly the immigrants that were the most impacted, we were going to end up with a national narrative that was not reflective of the truth of what we were experiencing on the ground. And so that was a very, very important priority for us, to make sure folks knew what was actually happening. You know, they knew about the rapid response networks that were decentralized and being built by local folks, by soccer moms, by suburban dads, by immigrant churches. And so that was really important to us. We wanted to make sure that the story of, you know, all of the organizations at this table and the work that they were doing and the organizations at other tables and the organic grassroots organizations that were popping up out of nowhere that were, you know, doing all of this work, where we were telling the story of what was actually happening on the ground, but in particular telling the story of the immigrants who were in hiding, who couldn't show their faces, but explaining their experience and how they were still able to be powerful and all of that. I say all that to say that, you know, that's not the focus of the work right now. We had some pivots. It's not because ICE has left Minnesota. I still get a call every single day from someone telling me, you know, I have a relative in Texas, from Minnesota, or in New Mexico. And so every single day we're in the community doing that work, providing support for folks, whether it's through rent relief, whether it's through, you know, dropping off diapers or just getting them connected to an immigration attorney. All of that work is still happening. It just looks a little different. But the other thing that we're doing, the really important fight, is being prepared for how this conversation is going to shift to an attack on our democracy. We saw that when the president and his lackeys were reaching out to us to negotiate an exit, not us, the group, us, the state, one of their demands was access to our voter rolls. And we were very lucky. Our Secretary of State said absolutely not. But we knew that this was never actually about our community members. And obviously there's, you know, deep hate and disdain for immigrants. But we also knew that what they wanted is to continue to have control over the government in our country. And they knew that they were losing this fight. They were losing the narrative, and that Minnesota was going to be a beacon of light for how you could see the way that we were working. And that the thing that they had to do was try to not only break our spirits, but break our electoral system. And that is something we're just not going to do. And so what we've been doing at this point, as we've been paying attention to this, as we continue to protect immigrants, as we continue to make sure each and every one of our neighbors are safe and advocate for policy and undo all those things, is that we're also leading an election protection network. And that work has really 3 major pillars to it. One, it's training. We saw all these new up and coming rapid response groups come out of nowhere. We're going to make sure those folks are trained and figure out how they're going to do that same work to protect our democracy. So in Minnesota, you can't be a poll watcher. That's illegal. We don't want people to organically try to show up at polling places and watch. That's not the goal. The goal is to have them in their communities, talking to their neighbors, making sure people know what voting rights they have and how to use them, and doing all of that advocacy work. But we also want them fighting against disinformation. Oh, I think I might have froze there. But fighting against disinformation is a big piece of it. So taking these massive networks that have been built and making sure that people are prepared to have the conversation around protecting democracy and fighting against disinformation. If we end up in a scenario where the president decides to end same-day voter registration through an executive order that's illegal, and we're fighting a lawsuit against it, and it's a week before Election Day, we need to be telling the public what is true and untrue. And one of the best ways to do that is through all these local networks that we've been putting together, and through the advocacy organizations that are so deeply trusted, and all of the grassroots movements that have just been built. So all of this camaraderie and solidarity we built, using it to train folks around this next fight. The other portion of that is tracking the national and local conversations around election protection and making sure that we're aware of any major changes, any discussions that might be occurring. And then the third pillar is actually building out an election protection program for primary day and election day. And so we have not left our immigrant neighbors behind. I'm an immigrant myself. I come from a mixed status family. The last thing I will be doing is leaving anyone that I love or any neighbor on the street unsafe and unsecure. But I also am spending a lot of time figuring out how I defend my democracy at once, because we are a multi-pillar movement that has to understand that all these fights are intertwined. And we are stepping up to build that work in Minnesota and tying it to the last fight we just had, because we know all of our liberations are intertwined and that all of these movements are intertwined. And yeah, that's kind of what I was up to, and the solidarity I had with all the folks on this call, and the kind of next scope of the work and the fight that we're getting into. And if anyone wants to get involved or wants to learn more about how we did it, please don't hesitate to reach out. And then I will pass it over to my sister to talk more about the work that she's been doing.
Thank you. And so there's a lot of questions in the chat. We're loving to the discussion about the alignment versus coalition. And so what's next? At Unidos, we believe that the first goal during the surge was to help on-ramp for a bigger we. And we did that through this constitutional observing project. And so as we're transitioning into the next phase, our goals are to materialize political consequences on the actors that enabled constitutional erosion, that are enabling authoritarian power grabbing, and are turning their face away from the cruelty of this failed economic agenda and the mass deportations apparatus. And so delivering the political consequences includes materialize an electoral majority and legitimize electoral results. And so as we have this, it is not necessarily a base. It is this hybrid of decentralized hub creation. Monarca incentivized. There was a very interesting moment during Metro Search, in which we had this technology for mass text messaging, in which one of those technology corporations sent us an email saying they were ending their contract in the next hour because they had heard notice from the Department of Homeland Security that we were engaging in illegal activity, and that it was part of the acknowledgments as we enter this contract to not engage into illegal activity that could be a threat to national security. So they decided to just end our contract. And so with very little time to find what to do with all these constitutional observers' trust that we have built, we made the choice to actually over-incentivize the participation in the hyper-local hubs. So we took that risk and just injected all of that flow of energy in the hyper-local hubs while we decided what to do with this infrastructure of mass messaging. And then what happened was beautiful. That was an actual incentive of leadership and ownership of regular people from St. Michael, Minnesota, to Hibbing, to Elko, to you name it. There is thousands of hyper-local communities organizing and taking care of each other. Now, these same communities are also the ones that are verifying and running mutual aid networks because they know their neighbors best. So that decreases the risk of infiltration, it decreases the risk of fraud, and it also protects communities in ways that no centralized infrastructure can possibly do with this amount of, it's $60 billion of enforcement. And so now the question that we have in front of us is, what is going to be the institutional organizing strategy to move these 50,000 leaders across Minnesota into this delivering the political consequences through electoral protections and through truth and reconciliation as we go into the next phase of the strategy. And so we also in this truth relationship with observers, we have received thousands of written, verbal, video, and photograph testimony of so many incidents that need to come to the light in the best possible way, while we know we don't have on-the-record institutions that can hold the Department of Homeland Security accountable in a minoritarian pro-immigrant government right now. And so what we're doing is also partnering with the state government to build what we called a preventive truth commission, where we are attempting to bring these hearings into the different communities that have experienced the constitutional erosions, the violence, the cruelty, so that we can continue to move the court of public the court of public opinion into the next phase of the delivering of political consequences. What we believe at Unidos is that we have been treated as a southern border country through the different apparatus that the liberal government has used to delegitimize governments. So we have been sent militarized enforcement. We have been economically embargoed. We have been occupied with violence and propaganda. And so that the next stage is the takedown of our institutions to play their own leadership and continue to grab the power as we move forward. And so having those global experiences as people that come from immigrant narratives, like they have immigration stories, or are just very curious about history, you know that the ways in which the US intervened, Guatemala, Haiti, Somalia, and other places are now being reproduced in the interior for the same political reasons. And so the lessons about the protection of our elections, the protection of our democratic infrastructure, are not part of like just, Minnesotans came up with that. We have observed history teaching us, people of color teaching us, people from other places teaching us how they have resisted the neoliberal aggressive agenda that was in the past foreign policy, but now is in the interior. And so there's a lot to do right now. We're excited about the forecast. We defeated this first phase, but we also believe that while we have some swing districts in Minnesota, will this agitprop will continue to happen. There are states that are swing states like Pennsylvania, like Georgia, that will have a different and more acute version of what happened in Minnesota closer to the elections to help delegitimize participation and results. And I'll pass it next to Mayday Strong with Nady.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Can we please give a big emoji shout out to all of these amazing leaders and organizations? I don't think it's a light statement to say that what you all have done is really give some of the most powerful and inspirational gifts to the rest of us in the country about how does it look like to fight together, standing with our neighbors and being strategic and on the offensive. So just thank you all so much for just spending time with the rest of us to hear your lessons, hear what you're holding. How did you get there? What are the things that you're still thinking about for the future? I'm just here to say to you all that, we must take what our folks in Minnesota have done and take it to the rest of the country. And I want to go back to what Greg was naming, that we know that we're going to have to flex these muscles and get stronger and bolder as a movement, because we see that it's just March and look at where we are in the United States, and we have 8 more months to go. And so I want to really have us sit with this piece around the trying, the experimenting, the testing, the building our muscles piece of it. And when do we have the opportunities to test those things out, to push ourselves in our own organizing ecosystems in our own backyards and our homes? And one of those moments is May 1st, 2026, where we're really taking this powerful gift from Minnesota around no work, no school, no shopping as a framework to get people building those muscles and saying, can we replicate what our brothers and sisters did in Minnesota in at least 10 other cities around the country for May 1st? So if you're interested in joining that effort, learning more about it, I see several of you in the chat are actually from like labor councils yourselves and other local unions. this space was specifically for folks like you all, because we know we have to learn from each other. So please fill out the pledge form. We will be doing more follow-up. And I just really want to say thank you again to all of you and Doran. And I think we have maybe a few minutes for questions. So if people want to drop their questions in the chat, folks are going to come back on and get quickly through those. But just thank you all so much.
Okay, so there was a couple of questions that I saw in the chat, and I think we could, I'm going to sort of synthesize them. So one was about sort of national to local partnerships. So what was effective or powerful or helpful about ensuring that we had and the way that we had I would actually put two kinds of national partnerships. So one is partners who helped us build a pathway to national political work with Congress and sort of like ensuring that we were lifting the story up. A partnership that helped us build lateral alignments for solidarity because we needed national solidarity in order to do what we needed to do. And then thirdly, there was kind of like meta infrastructure. I don't know what the right word is. It's like folks who have helped with training, equipping, all the preparation work. And so if there's a couple folks who want to say something about national partnerships, or actually we don't have time for that. Does one of you want to take some lessons learned about national partnerships? You want to take it, Greg?
Sure. Two quick thoughts and some stuff in the chat. So I think that, at least from my stance, the most useful part was when we had chosen some corporate targets. There really was a beautiful response around the country to put pressure on those corporate targets. And we know this is going to be an analysis over and over again, which is when we are in a local fight, there are local corporations that have immense power over the local business community. And for us to, for whatever city is under attack, for them to start, they have to initiate. They have to say, here's the corporations that can make this change and put the pressure on. But then we around the country can support that call. And that was so powerful and really was, I think, decisive in forcing some of the local corporations to come out publicly. The other one is it is an immense amount of pressure on the local organizations to have national organizations send in people. It's all in good spirit, but it can be crushing. And so we put together, and I would really recommend that the national movement keeps wrestling with this. We put together like a welcoming school, we called it. And so basically it was a container for the folks coming in from out of town to be absorbed, to share from our lessons. I mean, we want to make sure anybody who comes out here can get the best from what we have to offer locally, but then also plug in under the direction of the local organizations into concrete work that needs to happen. And without that little median layer of a welcoming committee, it can get really sloppy really fast. And in some ways overwhelm the local organizers with, dealing with outsiders rather than helping to move their own base. So with a little preparation, it's so powerful.
I'll also just add to that. That was very helpful. We had a couple of, we had help, or a way to put it is also like a connection to some configuration of national organizations that also had on the ground, either had on the ground constituencies or were powerful liaisons into the administration, the Trump administration, and also to Congress, kind of ahead of the DHS vote. And I think it was one of the most effective times I've experienced a really productive feedback loop between national partners and the local alignments. So I felt like national organizations were really taking the lead from Minnesota, but then also additive, like adding value. So I just, I could, there's a bunch of examples, but I'll shout out Indivisible has an incredibly powerful local chapter in Minnesota, Twin Cities Indivisible. But then also National Indivisible, like helped ensure there were solidarity actions at various points, activated their membership. Mayday Strong was an essential partner in doing a very similar dynamic with us. And then, like the national politicos in DC like followed our lead on our policy asks. So it was kind of happening on the fly, and it was really productive. I think the lesson for state and local groups, though, it really helps if you're aligned. So if you're aligned and know what you want, then it's a lot easier to relate to all of the abundance of partnerships and possibilities in the labor movement and the national progressive movement with partners in other states. And we built that website to try to help keep feeding both our national partners and also our partners in other states to like be in solidarity with us. But it takes some work on our end to make sure that we have a strategy and that we're clear. Okay. So we'll take one more question. This is a good one. What has organizing looked like since they have, to some extent, dialed back or shifted tack? They have dialed back. It is true. There is less ICE agents running around acting psycho and abusing people, but they have shifted tactics, and those tactics are kind of sneaky. And I do think there's a wrestling across the country with how we also adapt our tactics. And not fight the last war, but the war that's coming. And so I don't know if Amelia, you want to say a little bit about how we're trying to adapt tactics for the current iteration of how ICE and CPB are operating.
Thank you, Doran. So some of the things that are concerning is that in the latest arrests, there is a more incisive attempt to bargain with people. Can you tell me who is behind this chat? Who is behind this network? And like, maybe we can like cut some deal here. Can you turn in other immigrants? Now, the turning of more immigrants has happened throughout Metro Search, but there is a special interest in like the organizers or the leaders behind the chats, the mutual aid networks. And my theory is that they're trying to build this case about fraud. Are there any actual incidences that they can use and weaponize in this fraud narrative? Because they lost the ground and the narrative in Minnesota. And so they're also like they continue to do arrests on people. They try to barge into buildings still. There's still no need. They don't use warrants to come into places. They have failed to abide by the several judicial orders and the constitutional erosions that the Supreme Court has indicated that have happened in Minnesota. They continue to ignore that. And they have also gone in more like the dress up, try to like merge in the community, try to like get more intel. It feels, I don't know, I was not there, but it reminds me of the espionage and the intel that was harvested during the Red Scare, like kind of like salting and infiltrating groups, but waiting for the right moment to take us all. And so it is like we just have to be careful. We have to go deeper in our relationships. We have to know our neighbors, and we have to figure out like who's coming to our churches, who's coming to our schools. Like that is the best antidote, and also that's also the best resilient strategy to protect and defend our democracy at the same time.
Okay, that we are a little bit over time. So thanks everybody for your patience and for sticking with us. I want to thank everybody who had joined us today. And just so people know, there's a recording of this conversation that's going to be sent out to everybody who is registered, and you're free to share it. And as Wintana said, all of us are hungry to be in relationship and partnership with people all over the country as the crisis unfolds in our country. And we're also very excited about the path to May Day to keep exercising our muscles. So reach out anytime if you have particular questions or want to learn more. And we will be seeing you out there. Thanks so much.